There are children who never cause problems, never raise their voice, never demand attention. Adults love them because they're easy, mature, and well-behaved. But what almost no one notices is the quiet loneliness growing inside those children, the kind that doesn't look like pain, so it goes unseen for years. If you were one of those children, you probably learned very early that being good meant being safe. You learned that staying quiet kept things calm, that not needing much made adults relaxed, and that emotions were easier to manage when you handled them alone. No one explained this rule, but you felt it every time approval came more easily when you stayed small. Well-behaved children are often praised for their self-control, but that control rarely comes from comfort. It usually comes from hyper-awareness. These children watch facial expressions, listen closely to tone, and sense emotional shifts before words are spoken. Over time, they stop asking what they feel and start asking what's acceptable. Their inner world slowly becomes something private, something handled silently, something that doesn't need to be shared. Not because they don't want connection, but because connection feels conditional. These children don't experience loneliness the way we usually imagine it. They aren't ignored or excluded. They're included but not known. Surrounded by people, yet unseen in the places that matter most. Loneliness here feels like holding everything together on your own. It feels like being capable, reliable, and emotionally steady, while quietly wishing someone would notice how heavy that responsibility feels. But no one asks because nothing looks wrong. Many well-behaved children become emotional observers. They learn to read the room instead of expressing themselves. They learn to manage tension instead of creating it. Often, they're described as old souls or so mature for their age. What that really means is they had to grow up emotionally too soon. They learned to self-soothe, self-correct, and self-silence long before they were ready. Inside, there's often a low-level ache with no clear story attached to it. They don't feel neglected enough to justify pain, and they don't feel safe enough to express it. So the loneliness becomes normal, like background noise they stop questioning. As these children grow, the pattern doesn't disappear. It becomes refined. They turn into dependable adults who handle life well, who don't create drama, who others rely on in moments of stress. They are often the listener, the helper, the emotionally intelligent one. People open up to them easily. But when it's their turn to be vulnerable, something tightens inside. Being seen still feels risky. Needing still feels uncomfortable. Depending on others feels unfamiliar, even unsafe. They may have friends, relationships, careers, and families, yet feel strangely disconnected from their own inner life. Not because love is absent, but because receiving it fully feels foreign. Independence becomes their identity. Not because they never needed anyone, but because needing was never rewarded. So they learn to survive without asking. Emotionally, they often associate love with approval rather than presence. Love feels earned through good behavior, emotional control, and usefulness. So they keep performing goodness long after it's necessary. In relationships, they may overgive. They anticipate needs, avoid conflict, and downplay their own emotions to keep harmony intact. On the surface, they look emotionally healthy, but underneath, there's exhaustion. A quiet resentment they don't like admitting to themselves. A sense that connection always costs something from them. This loneliness is confusing because it doesn't come from rejection. It comes from adaptation. From learning to be agreeable, low maintenance, and emotionally quiet to protect connection. Parents often don't realize this pattern is forming. A calm child feels reassuring, especially in busy, stressed, or emotionally overwhelmed households. The absence of conflict gets mistaken for emotional security. A child who doesn't complain is seen as resilient. A child who doesn't demand is seen as grateful. A child who doesn't struggle is assumed to be fine. But emotional health isn't the absence of problems. It's the presence of safe expression. And many well-behaved children never experience that safety consistently. They needed curiosity more than praise. Someone to gently notice the silence and ask what lived there. Someone who didn't rush to fix or dismiss, but stayed present. They needed to hear, "You don't have to be easy for me to stay." They needed reassurance that connection wouldn't disappear if they were inconvenient, emotional, or unsure. Without that reassurance, the child learns to equate closeness with self-erasure. To stay connected, they must remain manageable. To be loved, they must not ask for too much. As adults, this belief quietly shapes their lives. They may struggle to set boundaries because boundaries feel like rejection. They may struggle to express anger because anger feels dangerous. Even joy can feel complicated. Fully expressing excitement, sadness, or need can trigger discomfort, as if something bad might happen when emotions take up space. Healing this kind of loneliness doesn't start with forcing confidence or independence. It starts with permission. Permission to take up emotional space without earning it. It means allowing yourself to feel without immediately managing the impact on others. Letting emotions exist before adjusting them. Staying present with discomfort instead of escaping into competence. It also means learning a new emotional language, naming feelings that were never welcomed, sharing them imperfectly, letting others respond even if the response isn't perfect. At first, this can feel selfish, dramatic, or wrong. The nervous system isn't used to being seen without performing. Vulnerability feels like exposure, not connection. But slowly, something shifts. You begin to notice how often you disappear in conversations, how often you minimize your needs, how often you default to being fine. And with awareness comes choice. You can choose in small moments to stay, to say a little more, to ask for help without over-explaining. The well-behaved child didn't choose loneliness. They chose safety. And that choice made sense in the environment they grew up in. What kept you safe then may be what keeps you lonely now. But patterns that were learned can be unlearned, gently, patiently, without self-blame. Loneliness doesn't disappear overnight. It softens when connection no longer requires silence, when being yourself doesn't feel like a risk. If this video feels uncomfortably familiar, you're not broken. You were adaptive. You did what you had to do to stay connected, and now you're allowed to adapt again. This time toward presence instead of performance, toward connection instead of silence, toward a life where you don't have to be well-behaved to be loved.